Hello, and welcome to our re-recording of the Let's Talk Perennials lecture in honor of National Public Gardens Week. I wanted to thank everyone for joining the lecture yesterday and sticking with it. We really appreciate your support during this time. We're learning how to use the technology. We've decided to re-record the lecture to make sure that you all receive all the information and that it is a worthwhile hour for you. So I'm going to start with, again, the thank yous. Thank you to Lynn Laffey, my boss, who has spent a lot of time and effort supporting me on this lecture, and so I appreciate that in her efforts. Dave Helmer, our executive director, and the Morris County Park Commission for supporting all our education efforts and our 3 horticulture sites, the Frelinghuysen Arboretum, Willowwood Arboretum, and Bamboo Brook Outdoor Education Center. And lastly, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Frelinghuysen. The Friends support all our education programs. So this lecture is in honor of National Public Gardens Week. In 2009, the American Public Garden Association and Rainbird started a National Public Garden Day. It's been so successful, it has become a week. This is the end of the week, and we're kicking it off. We're ending it with this lecture. Oh, I wanted to say, please, next year come visit us. We give free tours and free scavenger hunts during National Public Gardens Week. So let's get started. There's a few things I know that we have many levels of gardeners in the talk here today. And so I wanted to explain a couple of things. The first thing is each slide will say the name of the month of the when the plant is blooming. So it'll be May, April, that's when the plant's blooming. At the bottom of the slide will be the botanical name. I want to not scare you. So it is in Latin. You don't have to learn Latin. So the botanical name is there for you. So if you mail order, you can make sure that you are getting the plant that we're talking about. Common names will vary from location, or different people call things different things. The botanical name will always be the same. So let's get started. Okay, so first I want to say, I did say this was about perennials, but I'm sneaking in a few other plants because I think it's worth having in a perennial border. So the definition of a perennial is that it's going to die back in the winter, and there'll be nothing there, and then it'll come back the next spring. So in the middle of the winter, the area can be pretty bare. So I wanted to give you some choices to put into that garden. So starting in February, this year actually the weather was so warm that these plants were blooming in January, but witch hazel is a great shrub that blooms in the winter. You can see it here in this picture. So I have 3 slides of witch hazel. And this one's a yellow one. It gets about 10 feet tall. It can take sun to shade, so it's a great plant. And I just want to clarify the difference between sun, part shade, and shade. So if we're talking sun, we're talking 8 to 10 hours of sun. If we're talking part shade or part sun, that's about 6 to 8 hours. And shade will be 4 to 6 hours. And if you have less than 4 hours, most plants are going to struggle. Okay, so our next plant is the same. It's a witch hazel, but this is a red one. So I wanted to just show you a different color. To me, I like the yellow ones because in that the time of the year is usually darker and the yellow is brighter and pops a little more. But this is a nice variety. It is fragrant. And here we have sunburst. Sunburst is a great witch hazel for a perennial garden because it doesn't get as large as the other two. So the other two will be about 8 to 10 feet, and sunburst will only get up to 6 feet. So it's a smaller shrub and fits nicely in a perennial border. The deer do not eat any of these, so that's an added benefit. Okay, and again, not really a perennial, but somewhat. In April, a lot of our March and April, a lot of our bulbs start to bloom. And I wanted to point out our daffodils because many of us can't plant tulips because of the deer. And I just wanted to say there's so many different types of daffodils. This one's one of my favorite. It's called Thalia, but there's different ones with pink in it and orange and yellow. So this is definitely a bulb to consider, and the deer do not eat them. They do need sun, but since they bloom early, most of the trees don't have their leaves on them yet. So you can put them in a lot of different places. Okay, so I wanted to talk about hellebores today. It's a great plant. The deer do not eat hellebores. They take shade and they're early blooming. This one's in April, but there are, actually this year it was blooming in March. Um, so it's really early bloom. So I have three different types of hellebores in the presentation. So the first one I wanted you to see because when you walk by this plant, the flowers hang and you basically see the bottom of the flower. It's still a pretty plant, but there's been new varieties that have come out. So Royal Heritage, the flower stands up a little bit more and you can see it. And then we have Ivory Prince, where the flowers are actually up on a nice sturdy stalk. And it's a really, really pretty hellebore. Okay, next we have Bleeding Heart. This is a great plant. The reason it has two botanical names is because they changed the name recently. So I wanted to make sure you had both. The Dicentra is the one, I still see that in catalogs. So Bleeding Heart takes the shade to part shade. When you buy it, it's a small plant in a little pot, but beware, this plant can get about 3 feet tall and 3 feet wide. So when you plant it, leave a lot of room for it. I love the pink flowers, and this one, the deer will eat this, but if you put it in a spot in a fenced in area or spray it, those are options. So here in May, we have forget-me-nots. This one, the botanical name is really important because there's a lot of plants that people call forget-me-not. So the forget-me-not has a little blue flower, but when you have them in a mass, it's covered with blue flowers. This takes shade to part shade, and it likes a moist soil. It gets about 6 inches off the ground, so it's a low plant. And one thing you'll notice with perennials is as the season progresses, the plants are getting taller. Here we have sweet woodruff. This is also a ground cover. And I love this ground cover because the green leaves really stay green and beautiful throughout the season. The flowers are white, and May through June, it's like a carpet of white. It's scented. It can take the shade and partial sun. The deer do not eat it. And it's really great for a ground cover. And I like having ground covers in the perennial garden, so I don't have to mulch as much. And eventually you'll have such a full perennial garden that you won't have to use mulch in it at all. Here we have Brunera Jack Frost. This plant I like, it does have a beautiful blue flower, just like the forget-me-not, but I really like it for its white leaves. So once it's done blooming, you'll see it adds the white silvery color into the shade garden or part shade. This plant does not like moist conditions. It will rot. It definitely has to be well drained. Here we have comfrey. This is a medicinal plant, but it's also an ornamental plant. I think it is one that should be planted a lot more. This one gets about 2 feet tall. It's in part shade to shade. I like the little bell flowers, but the nice thing again with this is that as the season progresses, the leaves stay really nice. The deer do not eat this plant. So I'm really giving this one an extra recommendation. Golden basket is a yellow blooming, very low to the ground plant that is great for a rock garden. So this plant likes the soil dry, and it's really nice in a rock garden because it'll hang over the rocks, and the deer don't eat this. Here's another ground cover, epimedium. I chose this one to show you because most epimediums will bloom a little earlier, but they'll have their bloom first, and then their leaves will appear after the bloom, where this variety, the bloom and the leaves are at the same time. The deer don't eat it. This plant is at the Arboretum growing under a tree. It's a great ground cover for under trees, and it spreads. It gets about 6 to 8 inches tall. Here we have candy tuft. This is a great perennial, almost evergreen for, you could use it as a border edge. And if we have a warm season, it does stay evergreen. The flowers are white and scented, and the leaves are small and green, but it's very pretty. So this peony blooms early May, so I wanted to show you it because I'm always waiting for peonies to bloom around Memorial Day, beginning of June. This one's really early, and the flowers are single, so that means it won't, you don't have to stake it, it's not going to flop over. But I think it's a little surprise in the garden to be blooming when it is. And it has the ferny foliage. The deer do not eat peonies, but they do need full sun. And this plant gets about 18 inches tall. Here's another plant that we should all be planting much more often. This is Amsonia. It's a little blue star flower, and the green foliage is beautiful throughout the season. And then in the fall, it has beautiful fall color, so it gives you an extra season of bloom. And this variety is a shorter one, about 18 inches, but there is other varieties that are a little taller, 2 feet, 2.5 feet. And like I said, the fall color really gives that extra interest for this plant. Next is Baptisia. So this plant is great. I just said previously that, you know, as the season goes on, the plants get taller and taller. Well, Baptisia is a tall plant early. So it's great to have it in the garden for the height early in the season. We have this one's yellow, and we also have purple. And they're coming out with many new varieties. So the purple was used for dyeing in the past. Okay, well, here we have clematis. It's a vine, so depending on the way your garden is, you can put it on an arbor or a fence. And I really wanted to point out the clematis because this flower could be 6 to 8 inches across. It's beautiful. The clematis genus, they will bloom from different varieties from spring, summer, fall. So you can plant different varieties together to get different bloom times. They take different conditions depending on the variety. This one's in full sun. Nellie Moser is a really pretty one that can grow in part shade. Here is Geranium Biocovo. So this geranium is perennial geranium. It's not the red geraniums that we think of when we say geranium. This one's a great one. It is almost evergreen. So if we have a warm winter, those green leaves look like that in the middle of the winter. If it's colder, they do die back a little more. It blooms May, June. Full sun to part shade, and the deer will not eat it. Also, there are many different types of geranium. There are some blue ones that are very pretty, but the plant seems to get leggier. I chose this one because it has a really, really nice plant habit. The foliage stays nice. So this iris is really, to me, it's really sweet and cute. It's only 6 inches tall. And when it's planted in a mass like it is here, you can see how pretty the flowers are. And then when the flowers are done, it's a ground cover. So I like this one. Here we have catmint. I wanted to point this. So most perennials have a short bloom time. And I really wanted to point this one out because it started blooming in May and it really goes through October, sometimes November. I do cut it back a little bit in July to get the reblooming, and it does flop. So depending where you plant it, you know, you want it to flop a little. There are new varieties that are smaller, so you'll have less flopping. The deer do not eat this. It does take full sun though. Now we're getting towards the end of May, and these are the peonies we all think of. So crinkled white is pretty. It's not quite a full peony flower, but it's not a single. So it doesn't really need staking. It won't flop over. The deer do not eat any of the peonies, and I should say knock wood because I don't want them to start. And they take full sun. They get about 2 feet tall. And here we have Sarah Bernhardt. This one is scented, and you can see the layers of petals in this. And again, the deer won't eat it. And then once the flowers are done blooming, the plant, the green leaves will stay nice all season. The other thing about peonies is if you do want to divide them, you would do that at the end of September. And I'm not one to always follow the rules about dividing because, you know, if I see my plant and it's easier to divide things when you see them and you know what you want, where you want to move them. So sometimes I will do things in mid-season, but with this peony, I only divide the peonies at the end of September. Here we have a stilbe, and this is another great plant, a great genus, because we have so many different varieties of a stilbe. from ground covers to 5 feet tall. This one is about 2 feet. Blooms in June into early July. When I cut the flowers off, you can see the foliage is really pretty, so it adds greenery to the garden. Peonies like it a little bit moist, and so you don't, in a dry area, the leaves will start to turn brown. It also takes shade to part shade. And I used to say the deer don't eat these at all, but the I've seen some nibbling. I have to admit it. I've seen some nibbling, so you just be careful. Again, some things for the deer you can spray. When I do spray, I alternate sprays. So I'll buy one brand, and then when that bottle's done, I'll buy another brand, and just to rotate the sprays. Okay, so we have this is yarrow. So yarrow also comes in a number of different colors, yellow, red, and white. This red one is great. It only gets about a foot tall, but it flops a little bit. So it's nice in a rock garden or in a raised bed, or I don't stake it. I think it's fine to flop a little bit. And yarrow does like full sun, and it does also like dry soil. Here we have lady's mantle. So the lady's mantle, I have two pictures. So the first one shows the leaves, which are really pretty shape. And you see the water droplets are like little mercury beads. So when it rains, it looks like that, magnifying the leaf. And then here it is in bloom. It's a chartreuse color. This is gets about a foot tall, and it'll spread. And it's a nice ground cover. Again, it's a nice plant to have in the garden all season. The leaves look pretty, but you really want to keep it in part shade. Too much sun and the leaves will brown. And here we have Coreopsis. Again, this is another type genus of a plant that has many varieties and colors. So I picked sacred because it is the hardiest I've found. It comes back every year. It has the cute little yellow flowers. And there are other varieties. There's Moonbeam, which I don't feel as hardy. It might last a couple of years and then be gone. So, but try them out and see how you do. It's a great perennial. It spreads. It's probably about a foot to 15 inches tall. The deer don't eat it. This is another one that will bloom from June through October, just deadheaded during the season. And here we have iris that is variegated. So as you can see, the leaves are green and white. So iris bloom does not last that long. So I chose this to show you. So even if you don't have the bloom, you have the foliage. It adds a vertical to the garden, and the green and white. Here we have rose campion. I love this plant. I don't know why garden centers don't sell it more. So it's a little hard to find, I have to admit. But it has the silvery foliage, which is really nice. The deer don't eat it. This plant is full sun, and it gets about 15 to 18 inches tall. Here we have Mexican primrose, which there is evening primrose is in the same genus, and that's the yellow one, and that's beautiful too. But I like this pink. It's a soft pink, great for the edge of a border. And I love pink flowers in the garden, so this is one of my favorites. Okay, here we have Veronica. So again, this is a great plant. It has this variety is about 18 inches tall, but There are many different Veronicas. Some are like ground covers, some are tall. It gives a vertical interest to the garden, and I like it better than blue salvia because I think the foliage is a little bit nicer. Although the blue salvia is blue, while this is a little more purple. The Veronica does not like it wet, so you really, really have to have well-drained soil. And it comes in pink, whites, purples. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our slides, and I wanted to add in some roses because we have a beautiful rose garden at the Frelinghuysen Arboretum, and I hope you'll come visit when we open up again, when it's safe to do so. So I wanted to just show you a few roses. Here we have Rose Graham Thomas, and it's a David Austin rose. So when the David Austin roses came out, they said they were disease resistant, but they're not quite. They definitely need less spraying than the old-fashioned roses, but you have to look out for some of the, black spot and that kind of stuff. So here we have Gertrude Jekyll, which is a beautiful pink. All these roses are highly scented, and roses are great in a perennial border. And here is our last one, the Poet's Wife, and this is a beautiful yellow rose. The deer do eat roses, and they do take full sun. So that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for supporting us through this time. I did want to tell you that we are working hard to figure out our technical difficulties. So follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram. We will be having more lectures and programming. And thank you for joining us today.